What makes Five Nights at Freddy's so incredibly renowned by a wide range of audiences? Is it its horror, its charming simplicity? One of the biggest themes in modern FNAF, and something that has existed since even the first game, is its story. Even before Scott Cawthon knew his game Five Nights at Freddy's would spawn a dozen sequels and several dozen books, he was padding his simple indie horror game with lore for those who could find it. Nowadays, practically every fan expects each new game to come with extensive lore and clues to solving the mysterious past. Today, I'm looking at every Easter egg from the original trilogy, the first 3 games, and trying to make sense of what Scott was trying to tell us with these rare and hidden details. FNAF 1. One of the first Easter eggs you may come across in FNAF 1 is available from the start of Night 1. Unlike some of the other Easter eggs in this game that require luck and random number generation, this one relies on the player's curiosity, which could make it either the easiest or the hardest one to find since it won't naturally occur in time. In the office, there is a Celebrate poster, a pretty famous design that was remade for the FNAF movie, and a version of it showed up in the next game, FNAF 2. If the player decided to shirk his responsibilities and began clicking around the map instead of keeping track of the animatronics, they might discover that clicking on Freddy's nose makes a honk noise. Hey, that's pretty good. Every second, there is a 1 in 1,000 chance that the player will experience a visual hallucination. These hallucinations happen independently of Golden Freddy's appearance, but also accompany his Easter egg. The hallucinations flash images and/or text across the screen for a couple of seconds, displaying the words "It's me." While the phrase is commonly associated with Golden Freddy, as shown in the game and in the Silver Eyes, "It's me" also accompanies the hallucinations that did not include Golden Freddy, but flash images of Freddy with human eyes and Bonnie with black eyes and small white pupils. He also appears to have a lazy eye, which is probably just a design choice, but it is interesting. These hallucinations can happen at any time during the night, even if the power runs out. As stated previously, these hallucinations also accompany the Golden Freddy Easter egg, which is prompted by another Easter egg that we'll discuss later. In this Easter egg, which has a 1 in 32,768 chance of occurring, Golden Freddy appears in the office, slumped over and staring right at the player. Since we know that the images and text that appear are hallucinations, many people believe that Golden Freddy is also a hallucination. Further evidence is the fact that he doesn't have any animations for entering the office or killing the player, he just sort of appears. Also, he's the only animatronic in this game to crash the game instead of leading to a game over screen like the others. So while Golden Freddy is a significantly mysterious character, it's very likely that his appearance in this game is simply a hallucination. The first of its kind, this Easter egg entails an animatronic staring into the camera with blacked out eyes and pinprick white pupils. This Easter egg can only occur if Freddy is alone, which is a fairly often occurrence since he's usually the last to leave the stage. With that condition met, there is a 1 in 100 or 1% chance of seeing this Easter egg every time the monitor is opened. Since these numbers are run every time the monitor is flipped open, it is possible for multiple of these Easter eggs to be active at once. Here we have another "It's me" reference, a phrase commonly attributed to Golden Freddy, but is that true in this case? Well, first, the Easter egg changes the words on Foxy's sorry out of order sign to simply "It's me," and can only occur after Foxy has left Pirate's Cove, having a 1 in 100 chance every time the monitor is brought up afterwards. What does this mean? Well, like most of the other "It's me" references, the sign is probably a hallucination, since it can change to and from "It's me" in a matter of seconds if the player flips their monitor down and then back up. This is pretty similar to Golden Freddy's appearance, which is theorized to be a hallucination and can also be disrupted by simply looking at the monitor. As for why the sign changes, it's probably due to convenience. Either Mike Schmidt is hallucinating the message and his brain is looking for ways to insert it into reality, or Golden Freddy himself is sending the message, using the sign as a way to communicate this message. I also think it's possible that these kind of Easter eggs are evidence of the entire restaurant being haunted, which could be attributed to all of the possessed items inside, or even the idea that this restaurant is the same building as the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where the MCI occurred. If you're interested in hearing more about that, I'll link my FNAF 3 theory in the outro. In the West Hall corner, there is a Let's Party poster for Freddy smiling, which can occasionally change to one of 2 variants. The first one, with a 1 in 100 chance of appearing, basically seems like an alternative shot from the original photo shoot. Freddy's in the same spot and basically the same pose, except that this time he's peeling his scalp from his lower jaw and missing an eyeball. Along with his eye, Freddy also appears to be missing his endoskeleton, which, to be fair, you can't really see in the original poster either. For all we know, this could have been one of Scott's early designs before the endoskeletons were drawn into the character models. An interesting question to ask is this intended to be seen as an actual event or another hallucination? I'm sure all of the sane viewers are eager to dismiss this as just a meaningless Easter egg, one that probably doesn't depict reality, but let's humor the idea that it is meant to be taken literally. As mentioned previously, this poster changing could simply be evidence of the entire restaurant being haunted, as the characters within a poster changing pose is basically exactly what we see in the Silver Eyes, pointing towards this being a real occurrence rather than a hallucination. So did Freddy actually detach his upper jaw from his neck in this photo shoot? Not necessarily, but I think that the poster is haunted, allowing Freddy's visage to change pose kind of like a painting in Scooby-Doo. I mean, wouldn't it be kind of weird for Fazbear Entertainment to photograph Freddy like this for a Let's Party advertisement? Although we don't know much about the parties at this restaurant. Maybe one of Freddy's party tricks was peeling half of his head off. I guess that doesn't sound like fun, but look at Mangle. The kids loved pulling him apart limb from limb. Anyways, the second poster variant that can appear in place of Let's Party is a close-up of Golden Freddy, who was, at the time, referred to as Yellow Bear. This poster has a 1 in 32,768 chance of spawning due to the fact that the program couldn't compute 1 in 100,000 and is accompanied by a child's laugh. This Easter egg, by the way, can only occur once per night. Once this poster appears, Golden Freddy will spawn with the scripted visual hallucinations until the player flips up their monitor or waits too long and dies. Or, yeah, dies. You see, when the original animatronics jump scare the player, it's heavily implied that they die, but further that they're stuffed into a Freddy suit, which, as we know, often leads to possession.
They'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit.
When Golden Freddy jump scares the player, there is nothing that indicates that we are stuffed into a suit. In fact, the game almost immediately crashes. As mentioned by Phone Guy and seen in the game over screen, the original animatronics stuff the player into a suit and kill them if they're caught, which we see almost every time we die to the original animatronics. If Golden Freddy is killing the player when his jump scare appears, perhaps him not stuffing us into a suit is the reason that the game crashes. Our existence is over, which isn't true when we're stuffed into a suit, becoming another soul trapped in a prison of Fazbear Entertainment's making. Now, I did earlier say that Golden Freddy was a hallucination, but it's also possible that he's another spirit who simply has more supernatural abilities than the other. Then again, Phone Guy never mentions Golden Freddy in the first game, which may imply that he isn't really there. For now, I'll leave that up for interpretation, and maybe I'll go into it deeper in another video. Feel free to comment if you'd like to see me go more in depth on any of these Easter eggs. Another Easter egg that has a 1 in 100 chance of appearing every time the monitor is opened is one that affects the posters in the East Hall. These posters of Chica, Freddy, and Bonnie respectively will occasionally change to 3 identical drawings of a crying child who bears resemblance to the sad child from FNAF 2's minigame Take Cake to the Children. Now, does this have any lore significance? Probably not, but let's consider a possible meaning to these drawings. First, since the character style is similar to the sad child's design in Save Him, these drawings could be a reference to her. If you don't know, that character has since been retconned to be a female. A more likely interpretation, however, is actually laid out for us pretty clearly. Notice how the posters that change into crying children were originally posters of the animatronics in the restaurant. Most of you already know their backstories, but another Easter egg gives us specific details regarding these animatronics and the fact that they became possessed by children's spirits sometime in the past. With images of the animatronics turning into crying children, this could be supporting the idea that the kids are contained within the animatronics, and their hollowed eye sockets and small black pupils in the drawings are very similar to some images of the animatronics throughout the game. It's also worth noting that the silver eyes might hint that these drawings change due to the restaurant being haunted. In the novels, Jason is looking at a series of drawings when he turns away and then turns back to the drawings. When he looks back, the drawings had changed and the characters on the paper were now looking right at him. This is pretty similar to what we see in the games, with the drawings having a chance to change every time the player looks away. We'll see a few more Easter eggs involving drawings in this video, so keep this in mind anytime that's brought up. These posters can also be replaced with graffiti of the words "It's me" being written twice where the posters were, and once on the opposite wall. I'm going to have to assume that this message is being written by Golden Freddy since he's most often associated with the phrase, but there isn't much evidence to support that in this case. Interestingly, there is a chance for these Easter eggs to occur in tandem with another Easter egg we've yet to talk about. If the proper conditions are met, each of these changes have a corresponding newspaper that goes with them, meaning that out of 4 possible newspapers that can appear, 2 of them are forced to appear alongside their respective East Hall change. If the East Hall crying child Easter egg happens while the newspaper change is active, it will always be the 3rd newspaper. If the It's Me graffiti Easter egg is active alongside the newspaper Easter egg, it will always show the 4th variant. Like most of these Easter eggs, there is a 1% chance that one of these Easter eggs becomes active after each monitor flip. When this Easter egg is active, the rules for safety poster in the East Hall corner is replaced with one of 4 newspaper articles regarding the history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Conveniently, each one of these newspapers references the restaurant by name, which makes putting them all together a lot easier than it could have been. Although we don't know which Freddys they refer to, I'm guessing it is the pizzeria we hear about in FNAF 3, which would explain how the withered animatronics were possessed before FNAF 2. The details in these newspapers also seem to align with the cassette tapes in FNAF 3 that describe an employee wearing a mascot suit luring children children into a back room. These cassette tapes, of course, are ancient, and we know that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was opened in 1983 at one point, which would most likely be the restaurant referred to in these tapes. The first newspaper details the first MCI and gives us a lot of information to work with. We find out that 2 children were lured into a back room during the late hours of operation by a man dressed as a company mascot, and that the date was June 26, yeah, we don't know that much. We also read that the man responsible was caught on tape and was captured, presumably by police, and that the children were never found, with people assuming the worst. The second newspaper alludes to a history of complaints regarding the animatronics odor. According to the paper, the health department was once again threatening to close down the restaurant after reports of blood and mucus leaking from the animatronics masks. That's pretty much it for this one, short and sweet. The third paper seems to update what we learned in the first clipping, informing that 5 children are now linked to the aforementioned incident. We learn that the suspect has been charged, which seems to have been retconned or misinterpreted, and that the children have not been recovered. Finally, we learn that the restaurant has been struggling to convince families to return, saying it's a tragedy. Let's take a moment to acknowledge how incomprehensibly naive Fazbear Entertainment is. They're really trying to convince families to bring their kids back to the restaurant after one of their employees turned a children's entertainment venue into a parent's nightmare. Even funnier is the quote, "It's a tragedy." That's not even acknowledging how bad the incident really was. It's literally just describing it in as few words as possible. That'd be like me trying to convince you to let me house sit your apartment after I burned it half to the ground, saying it was a fire. Another interesting detail is the fact that this newspaper refers to the man using a mascot suit again, but this time they write dressed as a cartoon mascot. This could be nothing, but it reminded me of the Fredbear and Friends cartoon in FNAF 4, where we only explicitly see the 4 original animatronics and Fredbear. It is possible that cartoon mascot is arbitrary and is more of a generalization, but it's something that could have major implications to the meaning of the backstory. For one, Spring Bonnie does not appear in any bit of the show that we see in FNAF 4. This doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't involved in the show, or that he wasn't in any sort of cartoon, but it's intriguing that 3 games later we finally see instances of cartoon characters and Spring Bonnie is really the only one missing from the show. This could mean one of 2 things. One, that Scott is trying to tell us that Spring Bonnie was not the mascot referred to in these newspapers, or 2, that Spring Bonnie was removed from the show after the MCI. If the latter is to be believed, that would place the first MCI in 1983, or, although less likely, sometime before. We know that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was opened in 1983, and that location used 2 Springlock suits, so it's entirely possible that the MCI could have taken place as early as that same year. The fourth newspaper tells us that the restaurant eventually succumbed to the bad publicity and was closed. It stated that the company struggled for years to stay in business, but has decided to close by the year's end. We also learn that they haven't been able to find a buyer for the company and/or location, and we are left with a remarkably insensitive message from a company CEO. These characters will live on. In the hearts of children, these characters will live on. Sure, these characters will live on in the hearts of the few children who remain after visiting the restaurant. I made a couple of videos describing how I believe this newspaper in particular coincides with the cassettes from FNAF 3. So if you're interested, you can check out my FNAF 3 Follow Me theory or my History of Fazbear Entertainment for a detailed look into all of these newspapers. They'll be linked in the outro. Basically, I drew a connection between these newspapers' claims of struggling to stay in business and the reports of a budget restriction in the FNAF 3 cassettes. There are 2 possible Easter eggs that can become active in the backstage room, each with a 1% chance of occurring. Both of these events are similar and really peculiar. When Bonnie's in the room, he has a rare chance of staring into the camera with hollow eye sockets and pinprick white eyes. When Bonnie is not in the room, an Easter egg can still become active, but instead of him staring into the camera, it's all of the miscellaneous animatronic parts that do it. This is especially intriguing because a lot of the heads participating in this 1,000-yard stare don't seem to have any animatronic parts at all. They're just masks. The endoskeleton, Endo 01, can reasonably be explained by using the same logic that Phone Guy applies to the functioning animatronics. He hasn't been programmed to shut down. The masks, however, really don't have an easy explanation. Here are 2 of my thoughts. Golden Freddy is manipulating them with his psychic abilities, or Mike Smith is simply crazy. These 2 ideas are sort of separated by how you explain Golden Freddy. If you believe he's a real animatronic with some supernatural abilities, like his ability to teleport in and out of the office, then you might find him responsible for the turning heads. But if you think that It's Me is Mike's mind playing tricks on him and causing him to see the ghost of his late brother, then maybe you think the same about the heads. After all, Mike feeling guilty and hallucinating these characters passing judgment on him is very fitting to that narrative. Granted, you believe Mike Smith is Foxy Bro and this guy's older brother, and probably Michael Afton. Again, this could also be evidence that the entire restaurant is haunted, or this Easter egg is near meaningless. I love the thought that Scott has intentionally injected all of this hidden lore into every piece of FNAF media, whereas he probably just thought, what if the heads looked at you and their eyes went away? That'd be creepy. Now, we're all familiar with the sound that Foxy makes when you slam the door in his face, but that sound also has a 2% chance of playing every 10 seconds. With Foxy able to be in Pirate's Cove when this happens, it opens the door to another animatronic possibly being responsible. Scott spoke briefly about this in one of Dawko's streams, saying, "I would need to know exactly which sound." Foxy does one of the knocks, and then later writing, who's to say, could be anything. Now if we take this at face value, then every time we hear this knock, it could be anything. A hungry customer looking for a late night snack, William trying to get out of the safe room. To paraphrase Scott's words, this could really be anything. Occasionally, circus music can be heard playing somewhere in the background. With a 1 in 30 chance of occurring every cycle, does this tune have any implications to the story? Well, most likely yes. It's probably a message from Scott himself reminding me and everyone else who hyperanalyze these games where we belong. It could be a reference to Circus Baby's Pizza World, maybe. I don't necessarily think it's an in-world reference to the restaurant, and I doubt Scott was trying to allude to a circus-themed restaurant in the first game, but I think it's an interesting detail in retrospect. Call me crazy, but one of the posters in the East Hall even reads Fun Time. Could this be an indication that Mike Smith may be hallucinating about his time around Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, and perhaps even Pizza World? Another simple explanation is that the music is part of the restaurant, and it's simply malfunctioning or being triggered at night. Let me know what you think. On the topic of songs, Foxy has a 1 in 30 chance every 4 seconds to sing a short piece, given he's not in the process of leaving a stage. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this tune, and the FNAF movie recently brought it to more general audiences, but does it mean anything? Well, first, does him humming have anything to do with him being possessed? I don't really think so. While it's not uncommon for children to be musical prodigies like Foxy obviously is, I don't really think humming is something that he got from Fritz. It could rather be in reference to him being a pirate. Pirates are somewhat known for their shanties or tunes they'd hum while doing rhythmic labor, like raising sails or rowing. Although Foxy's tune doesn't particularly follow a set rhythm, it's possible that this is something that was carried over from his performance programming. When you think about it, the other animatronics are in a band together, either singing or playing an instrument. So when Foxy's on stage, he has nothing to do other than bite kids. Even if he never performed this little number in front of the purple curtain, I believe it's something he developed from his programming. Here's a nice little Easter egg that seems to complicate one of my earlier theories. After the game over screen we've all become well acquainted with, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that Golden Freddy's jump scare will load in place of the title screen. Aside from this literally being insult to injury, this really puts a kink in the hose I drank from earlier. I believe that Golden Freddy's jump scare was an indication of the player simply dying rather than becoming a spirit. But in this instance, we see the player becoming a spirit and then dying. So does my theory still stand, or does this Easter egg change the way we have to think about everything? Well, I don't think it discredits my theory, but honestly, I don't know what to make of it. I'm willing to chalk this one up to something that's incredibly rare and that only serves to keep the game interesting. I mean, I can't think of any other instances of a dead person being jump scared, neglecting UCN. It's always a living person, guard or daughter of William Afton, being attacked and killed, and that's it. And since we see the players remain stuffed into Freddy's suit, why would Golden Freddy then attack us? I find this to be more of a secret screen than an in-game event with lore meaning. One of the only Easter eggs in this game that can be manually activated has to do with the custom night settings. Due to a rumor regarding a secret ending if the numbers 1987 or 1987 are put into the animatronics difficulty settings respectively, Scott updated the game to version 1.13 and included Golden Freddy's jump scare when the player attempts to play with these settings. Again, I think this is just something that Scott added to keep things interesting, but it's one of the only connections between the bite of 87 and the bite of 83. I really want to think that the bite of 83 was actually the bite of 87 for simplicity's sake, but most of the evidence we have goes against this idea. I'm not sure what made Scott think that we wanted another bite incident before resolving the first one, but then again, he evidently thought this scene was a good idea.
I always come back.
So does this mean that Golden Freddy was responsible for the bite of 87? Most likely not. From what we know, the bite probably happened at the Pizzeria from FNAF 2, as the year is 1987 and it's the last time we hear of the animatronics being able to walk around, which we know was changed after the incident. So how do we know he didn't do the bite there? He wasn't involved in the restaurant at all. Of course, he is in the game, which either shows that he's a hallucination, apparition, or real animatronic, but his character was not used in the restaurant. As far as we know, only the toy animatronic animatronics were present at the restaurant, and probably Balloon Boy and maybe the puppet and Dee Dee. We do know that William came out in the Spring Bonnie costume, which should have been a red flag for any employees or customers who'd never seen the character at the restaurant before, so I guess it's possible that Golden Freddy could have waltzed out and bit into someone's forehead without anyone thinking twice. However, he most likely had nothing to do with this incident, so this screen is probably just a troll. When entering or returning to the title screen, there is a 1 in 1,000 chance that an image of Bonnie will appear for a few seconds before being sent to the title screen. During this event, Bonnie is seen staring at the camera in the same way as he does in the visual hallucinations, and his pinprick pupils appear for half a second before the image leaves the screen. While you could say that this is just a creepy and unexpected image that Scott added to increase tension, I think it's also to show that the animatronics are possessed. For 9.5 seconds, Bonnie is facing the camera in front of a black screen, which could just be a shot of his mask for all we know. But then his eyes appear for a split second, showing that this isn't just a mask, there's something in there. You could also connect this Easter egg to Give Gifts Give Life, where only the masks of the original animatronics are put onto the MCI victims' heads. In the opening newspaper, most of the text outside of focus appears to be nonsense, but there's actually some complete sentences hidden within. Hidden amongst several blahs are messages like, "This ad has nothing to do with anything relevant to the game," and "This probably isn't the best choice of a summer job since you most likely won't survive the week. I'd recommend being a cashier, a sack boy, or work in a warehouse. Those are very respectable jobs, and you probably won't be killed doing them." Well, you might, but it would be unlikely. This is an instance of Scott's humor, but also gives us something to think about. Although Scott says that the ad is not relevant to the game, he refers to the help wanted ad, saying that it probably isn't the best choice of a summer job. This seemingly puts us in the same position as we're in during the second game. Our paychecks are dated November, but the media and phone calls refer to it as a summer job. This could mean that the ads and phone calls are old, but it still raises some questions. For now, let's take Scott at his word and consider this message irrelevant. Welcome to FNAF 2. You'll notice that there's a Celebrate poster in the office just like in the first game. And just like in the first game, Freddy's nose makes a honk if you click it. I wonder how much of the fortune Fazbear Entertainment spent on these new animatronics went into making their noses honk in the posters. Every time the monitor is flipped down, there is a 1 in 1,000 chance that JJ, a recolored female version of Balloon Boy, will appear under the desk. This one can be pretty easy to miss if you're constantly flipping your camera up and down, but it can definitely make the player a bit uneasy if they don't know who she is. Luckily, JJ is completely harmless. Here's an Easter egg that isn't completely harmless. When the monitor is flipped down, 1 in 16,384 times a silhouetted version of Toy Bonnie will appear in the office. This character is often called Shadow Bonnie, or RWQFSFASXC for short, and acts similar to Golden Freddy in the first game. Staring at Shadow Bonnie for more than 4 seconds will crash the game. It also makes you shit. To survive this Easter egg, the player is meant to shine Shadow Bonnie with their flashlight. We see more of Shadow Bonnie in FNAF 3, where he appears in a minigame alongside Fredbear in what looks like a very vintage restaurant. We also get another variant of Fredbear, who dons a brown hat in this minigame, which certainly clears up the Fredbear Golden Freddy confusion. He just has a lot of hats. Despite being a recolor of Toy Bonnie, it seems that Shadow Bonnie may be more of a Spring Bonnie variant than Toy. RXQ also appears in the Fazbear Fright story Blackbird, where he attaches himself to a boy named Toby and grows stronger as Toby becomes more fearful. This seems to support the idea that RXQ is an agony creature created by extreme negative emotions. Although the Toy Bonnie silhouette adds a bit of confusion, I think it's most likely that Shadow Bonnie was created by William Afton using the Spring Bonnie mascot suit in the first MCI. That would explain why he's on stage with Fredbear and where the negative emotion that formed him came from. It's also worth noting that, similar to Golden Freddy in the first game, RXQ was supposed to be far more rare. Initially, he was programmed with a 1 in 1 million chance of appearing, which became 1 in 16,384 due to a program overflow. You may have noticed the 3 paper plate dolls that hang on the wall in Party Room 4. Or was it 2? You see, there's actually a 1% chance that one of these dolls activates with an AI level of 1 during the night. If successfully activated, it will attempt to move out of the party room and into the office. Doing so poses no threat to the player, it simply hangs on the right side of the wall across from the desk with a smile on its face. It's actually pretty cute. I mean, he leaves the other paper pals to give us a visit. That's pretty cool. You know, one second he's pinned on the wall in the party room, and the next he's made his way onto the wall in the office, on his own. He's definitely possessed. Golden Freddy's always been an antagonist, right? I mean, in the Silverized he's kind of a hero, but in the games he jump scares the player and kills them, presumably. Anyways, Shadow Freddy is pretty much a harmless and purple version of Golden Freddy, specifically his model from this game, as he's missing an ear and sits in an identical pose to Golden Freddy. You may notice that he's not that similar to Shadow Bonnie in appearance. While Shadow Bonnie is a completely blacked out version of Toy Bonnie, Shadow Freddy is just a dark shade of purple, which can somewhat pass for black. When his Easter egg activates, which has a 10% chance of appearing every time the monitor is brought up, Shadow Freddy appears appears in the parts and service room, but can only happen if Withered Freddy and Withered Foxy aren't around. This appearance is peculiar. Like JJ, Shadow Freddy seems to teleport into frame and doesn't really do anything. To give JJ and Paper Buddy credit, they at least appear in the office near the player, which sort of explains their movement. They're curious about this new night guard. Shadow Freddy, on the other hand, teleports into parts and service to lounge around for a while without even acknowledging the player. This makes me think that he's either a hallucination of the players or he's not in control of his movement. In case of the latter, maybe he's phasing in and out of the mortal plane, existing somewhere between apparition and physical manifest. Similarly, assuming he's an agony creature like Shadow Bonnie, how did he form? Well, we later see him again in a series of FNAF 3 minigames, where he appears to be guiding the classic animatronics towards William Afton, but at that point he already exists. Unfortunately, we don't really know when or where these minigames take place, so we can only theorize based on that appearance. It's entirely possible that he could have spawned after the bite of 83, which would have fit the conditions for agony to form, but there's really no evidence of that being true. With a 10% chance of appearing in the prize corner after the puppet leaves, an endoskeleton known as Endo02 is always lurking nearby. I always thought that the name Endo02 was sort of confusing because it comes before Endo01 in the timeline, but if the withered animatronics are using Endo01 model endoskeletons, then it would explain why they are numbered the way they are. Otherwise, FNAF 2 would really be FNAF 1 and 1 would be 2, with Endo01 being 02 and 02 being 1, you know, like for simplicity's sake. But they aren't. Upon examination, it seems that the withered animatronics use the Endo02 model of endoskeleton, meaning that the numbered distinctions between the two models are most likely not their official in-world name. As for his appearance in the game, the fact that there's a skinless endoskeleton with the ability to move around the restaurant means one of two things. Either Fazbear Entertainment's programmers need to go back to the drawing board, or it's possessed. I don't really see how this endoskeleton could be possessed at this point in the timeline, unless maybe it came out of Golden Freddy or one of the other animatronics we know to be possessed. I've heard speculation that Golden Freddy doesn't have an endoskeleton in FNAF 1, which explains why he's slumped over, and assuming he's Fredbear or an otherwise unused suit simply left in storage, if his endoskeleton was removed in 1987, it would explain why he doesn't appear to have one in the first game. We don't know for sure how Golden Freddy was possessed, whether he had a body stuffed into him like the original animatronics, or if his possession stems from the bite of 83, but my belief is that Fredbear and Golden Freddy are not identical animatronics. I do think that they're the same character, but that they are two different suits. So the aubergine adorned Fredbear biting the crying child shouldn't have caused Golden Freddy to become possessed, since as far as we know there was no Fredbear suit with black accessories at that restaurant. If you watched my FNAF 3 solving Follow Me video, you know that I think Follow Me takes place early in the timeline, before FNAF 2. If that is the case, then William could have very well stuffed Golden Freddy's suit with one of the 5 MCI victims. Provided this much is true, if his endoskeleton was salvaged later on, it would absolutely be possessed. What do you think? I also want to mention that it is possible for Endo02 to appear in the prize corner and left air vent at the same time, albeit with a chance lower than winning the lottery without buying a ticket. Since it's so rare, and based on the assumption that this was a programming oversight, I'm not going to try to explain how he can be in two places at once. Feel free to share in the comments if you feel like this is lore relevant. Once you let the puppet out of its box, there's a 2% chance that one of 4 transparent images will flash on the screen after strobing the flashlight in a room that the puppet is occupying. My prevailing theory on why this happens is that the puppet is more of a ghost than the other animatronics. I mean, of all of the possessed animatronics in the lore, how many of them can fly? I could probably count the number on one hand, or one finger. Similarly, the way Charlie possesses the puppet seems to be unique to the others. I talked about this in my original puppet video, but most of the animatronics are possessed by their bodies being bound to the animatronic's metal. As we know from the 4th closet, the spirit follows the flesh. That explains why the suits that William stuffed, or the puppet depending on how you interpret give gifts give life, are possessed. It's because their bodies are trapped in the animatronic suits. The puppet, however, came about differently. After dying near the puppet, her soul became entangled with his. As far as we know, Charlie's flesh never came in contact with his parts. So if the spirit follows the flesh like we're told in the novels, how does Charlie possess the puppet? It could be through agony, as consciousness can merge with items and artificial intelligences in the presence of a strong negative emotion. Again, this is all explained in that puppet video. So that's why I think that this Easter egg exists. It shows that the puppet is more ghost-like than the other possessed animatronics. Much like the Eyeless Bonnie Easter eggs from the first game, there are 3 similar screens in this game consisting of Withered Freddy, Withered Foxy, and Toy Bonnie, which have a 1 in 1000 chance of appearing after their respective events. The warning screen, at the beginning of any night, and after the game over screen. These screens don't do anything more than play a clip of audio and are most likely meaningless. Since one of these screens can appear before the game starts, I think there's simply rare screens than actual events. If you're looking for some kind of forced explanation, I guess some of them could be hallucinations or real events. Aside from Freddy's, which occurs on the title screen, the Easter eggs occurring at the beginning or end of night could be pre- and posthumous perceptions. I don't necessarily think this is the case, so do what you will with the information presented. Now, some of the Easter eggs in this game may be new to you, but pretty much everyone knows about the minigames. With a 10% chance of getting one of these Easter eggs after dying, each minigame seems to tell a different story surrounding the characters and events of FNAF 2. This is actually the first game in the series to feature minigames, as well as the first time we saw the infamous purple guy, along with other characters such as Charlie and the MCI victims. Most of these minigames are pretty widely agreed upon, so I'll quickly explain them. Save Them follows Freddy and the puppet as they roam what appears to be the FNAF 2 location, while the words "Save Them" are being spelt out in the background. In this minigame, you can see what looks like withered Chica, Bonnie, and Foxy, as well as withered Golden Freddy, Mangle, presumably Toy Bonnie, Freddy, and Chica, 5 victims, and occasionally William Afton. William is sort of an Easter egg inside of this minigame, as he has a 1% chance of running out of the right doorway in any room. When this happens, he charges the player, withered Freddy, and the minigame ends, leaving the words "You can't" on the screen, in reference to the message "Save Them" before crashing the game. Like another minigame in FNAF 2, Take Cake to the Children, there is no way to complete the objective being spelt out in the background. In Take Cake to the Children, you play as Freddy as he repeatedly brings cake to 6 kids to keep them from crying. Unfortunately, there's another child outside of the boundaries that Freddy cannot reach, which is probably the least of her worries since she's most likely in the pouring rain, which is also dwarfed by the fact that the sadistic purple guy is on the prowl. As Freddy serves cake to those within his reach, Charlie Emily is approached by purple guy and killed. Charlie noticeably stops crying for some time when she sees William, and then bawls seconds before dying. This may be due to the fact that William isn't a killer yet, and Charlie only knows him as her dad's business associate, which is supported by Henry insinuating that Charlie was William's first victim. Anyways, this minigame ends with the puppet's jump scare, implying what we later see in FNAF 6, which is that Charlie came to possess the puppet after this incident. Give Gifts Give Life shows the puppet giving animatronic suits to 4 victims, presumably the victims of the first MCI. Then again, the puppet is present and Save Them when 5 additional bodies turn up. But let's keep things simple for now. The puppet places one of the 4 original animatronic masks on each of the victims and then goes around and gives them each a gift. Of course, this minigame is pretty mysterious, and there is some debate on whether or not the puppet stuffed the suits. Some sources have William stuffing the suits, such as the movie and original novel trilogy, whereas the game seem to imply that it was the puppet, unless the minigame is more representative than real. Furthermore, if William did murder 5 people and the puppet never came along to hide them, then he wouldn't have got off as easy as he did. Sure, FNAF 1 tells us that they charged the man responsible, which seems to be contradicted in later games, but in sources like the Silver Eyes, he gets off because the bodies were never found, meaning they couldn't confirm that they were dead. Whether or not the puppet is directly responsible for stuffing the bodies, he appears to give them life, which could possibly be separate from simply putting them into the suits. We know that the puppet is more aware than most of the animatronics and is always thinking, so maybe he had a unique understanding of how to bring the victims back to life. Aside from giving them life, he gives them each a gift, which leaves me stumped. I mean, we've heard the saying, the gift of life, but the objective is to give gifts give life, seemingly 2 different actions. What do you think? Foxy Go 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 shows Foxy running out of Pirate's Cove to surprise a room full of children. He does this twice successfully before the purple guy appears, and nowadays, bringing your kid to a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is pretty much guaranteed to end in some sort of tragedy. At the time, however, this was one of, if not the first incident to occur at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. We know that the bite of 83 took place fairly early on, but that was at Fredbear's Diner, and while I believe that Charlie's death happened at a Freddy's Pizzeria, a lot of the fan base associates that incident with Fredbear's as well. Foxy Go 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 seems to depict the MCI that occurred at the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza sometime from 1983 to 1987, with the 2 biggest candidates being 1983 and 1985. Without the evidence from FNAF 3, we can theorize that this minigame is set at the first pizzeria, since Foxy's in service while he's replaced in the second restaurant and is out of order in the third. Further evidence is the fact that this minigame ends with withered Foxy's jump scare, which we know came from the previous location. This minigame is probably showing us that the purple guy is responsible for the animatronics becoming possessed. I don't necessarily think the fact that we play as Foxy is significant. If anything, it could be to show why Foxy runs down the hall in the first game, but comment below if you disagree. Just like in the first game, there are hidden messages in both the opening and ending newspapers. The paragraphs hidden in these newspapers are the exact same as the ones from the first game, so I won't be going over them again. By now you should know, you see a nose, you honk it. Mr. Cupcake from the first game has a 1 in 10,000 chance of appearing on the desk every time the maintenance panel is accessed. In this appearance, Mr. Cupcake is purely aesthetic and sits idly until the next time the panel is used, disappearing again. This one could be difficult to explain for a couple of reasons. One, we haven't even really seen Mr. Cupcake move before, so him appearing on the desk out of nowhere is a bit mysterious. Secondly, he can't be characterized like the other phantom animatronics in this game since he appears to be a real animatronic rather than a phantom. So if he's real, how does he appear on the desk? Well, he could be possessed in some way. While it doesn't seem like we've had much evidence of this being true in the games up until now, he does move and help Wanted and in the recent FNAF movie. Another interesting detail comes from the Follow Me minigames introduced in this game. While we can't be certain of when the events depicted take place, one thing is clear: the 4 original animatronics are ravaged. One of the 5 animatronics in this minigame, yes 5, the only one who appears to survive is Mr. Cupcake, who appears to be completely intact after Chica is disassembled. Does this mean that Mr. Cupcake is still around after the core 4 are gone? And furthermore, that perhaps the souls of the animatronics made their way into him. Depending on when these minigames take place, this could explain how the cupcake is present, along with several other salvage props that the company is procuring from past restaurants, as well as how he may have become possessed after the events of the previous games. That is just a theory. I think it's just as likely that this is simply a lore devoid Easter egg that's more of a nod to the previous games than anything else. After all, FNAF 3 is a lot different from FNAF 1 and 2, which both feature restless animatronics in a vintage restaurant setting. With all of those characters being absent from the third game, it's possible that the cupcake is simply a familiar face to make players feel at home. While only Paper Buddy was known to move in FNAF 2, Paper Freddy and Bonnie return in this game and can appear randomly inside of the office. Freddy and Bonnie have a 1 in 10,000 chance of appearing respectively every time the maintenance panel or monitor is used. So, like Paper Buddy, how do these decorations move on their own? Well, maybe they don't. While a lot of this game has to do with visual hallucinations, the Paper Pals don't appear to be phantoms like the animatronics, but their appearance is also pretty peculiar. Given that FNAF 3 is supposed to take place 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is closed, which means at least 2017, although more likely 2023, isn't it interesting that these paper decorations are in the same condition as they were decades ago? I mean, to be fair, I've made the argument before that game models aren't the best evidence, but given that we don't know much more than what meets the eye when it comes to the Paper Pals, for the moment, let's work with what we have. We could argue that the appearance of the toy animatronics parts indicates that the Paper Pals might not be real, since they were supposed to have been scrapped in 1987, but we also know that Fazbear Entertainment can't really be trusted. After presumably sitting in an abandoned restaurant that we know was left to rot for quite a while for up to 3 decades, the fact that these dolls made out of paper plates and streamers are in exceptional condition is very curious. So, leaning into a common theory that Michael Afton is the protagonist from the first 3 games, he would have the capacity to hallucinate these characters from the restaurant he would have worked at in the 80s. Another possible explanation is again that these aren't necessarily lore-based and that they simply appear to keep the game interesting. Or, is it possible that the whole building is haunted? Of course, we know that animatronics can become possessed under certain conditions, but is it possible that their possession could span beyond the metal endoskeletons? Another interesting detail is the fact that Paper Buddy, the only Paper Pal who moves in the second game, is the only Paper Pal who doesn't move in this game. If he or the old restaurant was possessed, how would that explain why they only seem to move under certain conditions or in certain settings? Another complicated and returning Easter egg from the last game is the appearance of Shadow Freddy, with a 1 in 10,000 chance of appearing in the office every time the monitor is used. He also looks a lot different than he did in the second game, no longer having glowing eyes or teeth and having a suit that looks more ash gray than purple. What does this mean for the character? Well, Shadow Freddy seemed to endure a pretty significant change between 1987 and roughly 2023. Assuming this is the same character, which is sort of complicated by the fact that he also appears in some of the mini-games in this game as a dark purple sprite rather than gray, why does he look so much different? Let's also assume that he is somewhat real as opposed to a hallucination. Could this mean that Shadow Freddy is no longer possessed as he may have been in FNAF 2? We also don't know for sure when the Follow Me minigames take place or if Shadow Freddy was possessed at that point. Honestly, we don't know if he was ever possessed at all. All that we know is that he can appear and vanish from rooms at will and that he can enter the safe rooms unlike other animatronics. In my recent Follow Me theory, I theorized that Shadow Freddy isn't really a character at all. He's just the way Fredbear appears when he's in darkness. In this context, Shadow Freddy may be one of the pieces of memorabilia that the company found at an old restaurant, or if Shadow Freddy is more of an apparition than a physical animatronic, perhaps his presence is tied to another prop that the company brought into this building. For example, objects can be possessed in the same way as animatronics, and spirits can become bound to certain items. If Shadow Freddy is perhaps an agony creature that formed after Cassidy's death, it's possible that his presence is linked to one of the animatronics without him actually possessing it. That would explain why he appears where he does in the games, in the parts and service room in FNAF 2 where animatronic parts from the first Pizzeria would be, pharmacy and buy a box of animatronic parts in FNAF 3, suits that we know contain some of the original animatronic parts from the 1983 animatronics. As for his eyes and teeth no longer glowing, this could be an indication that the Follow Me minigames are in the past, and that most of the possessed animatronics have been set free. This theory is sort of contradicted by the foxy head phone dude refers to, which has its right eye lit up like all of the animatronics in the bad ending, which imply that they are still possessed. However, I don't really consider that a counter-argument since the endings are most likely more representative than actual in-world events, and we know that this foxy head would be around 30 years old, so it makes sense that it wouldn't be 100% functional. However, with FNAF 3's endings being the last event in this game's timeline, is it possible that the animatronics are still possessed somewhere during this game's events? One common theory about Follow Me is that it depicts William salvaging the original animatronics for their remnant, which he uses to create the Funtime animatronics, leaving the Fazbear animatronics lifeless by transferring their spirits into the Afton animatronics. In this theory, the event is believed to take place shortly after the events of FNAF 1, which would be around 30 years before this game. So are the original animatronics possessed during FNAF 3? What do you think? In this Easter egg, a drawing of Mr. Cupcake has a 1 in 100 chance of appearing on Cam 04, replacing a drawing of Toy Bonnie. Similarly, a gold Mr. Cupcake can appear in the same way, but with only a 1 in 10,000 chance. These moving picture Easter eggs are always hard to explain, but the only two possibilities that make sense to me are that Mike is hallucinating them, or the whole building is haunted due to all of the haunted objects that the company has been collecting for the new attraction. Since the player, presumably Michael, most likely hasn't had any experience with a possessed Mr. Cupcake, I don't really see a reason for him to be hallucinating drawings of him. For that reason, I think it's most likely that the drawings occasionally change because the building is actually haunted at this point. Well, Fazbear's Fright is either the best horror attraction ever or the worst. Probably the worst. In this Easter egg, there is a 1 in 10,000 chance for the posters on Cam 02 and 10 to be replaced with posters of Spring Bonnie every time the monitor is used. Interestingly, the posters of Spring Bonnie are in the same art style as the posters they replace, meaning that all of the posters in this style most likely come from the 1983 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the only restaurant we know had both the original and classic animatronics. I still think these posters appearing and disappearing randomly could be an indication of the building being haunted, but specifically in this case, with Spring Bonnie being the subject of the posters, their strange behavior could be tied to Springtrap. Like the rare screens from the previous game, FNAF 3 has a 1 in 1,000 chance of displaying one of 3 images after the warning screen, game over screen, and at the beginning of any night. Each of these screens has a corresponding image, ranging from a pretty bland headshot of the character to him peeling his mask off in a similar way to Freddy's rare poster in the first game. I guess William likes to party too. Now, we can't be sure exactly when these images take place, but we can assume that it's sometime pretty long after he is spring-locked, since the suit is pretty decayed. William's body, on the other hand, is not terribly decayed, but it's hard to say whether or not that's relevant. I mean, presumably the MCI victims decayed fairly quickly since technicians did a full overhaul on all of the original animatronics and probably didn't find anything in its entirety. Anyways, these images could take place anywhere from the moment he was spring-locked, showing him try to escape the suit, or more likely sometime when he re-emerges as Springtrap during the events of this game. Kind of off topic, but are we meant to believe that William sat idly for around 30 years before Follow Me in FNAF 3? I mean, FNAF 3 implies that he was recovered from a safe room where he may have been since 1993, right? So maybe he went into some kind of hibernation over those years, or he could have spent that time desperately trying to free himself from his spring-locked suit. Either way, I think these screens are meant to further emphasize that Spring Bonnie is the suit referred to in the cassette tapes, and to give a bit of backstory by showing that a man still resides inside of the animatronic, something that we haven't necessarily seen before. Something worth noting is that when the map in this game is turned upside down, it closely resembles the creator Scott Cawthon's profile picture of Animdude. I can't imagine this has any lore relevance, but call it an Easter egg if you will. This Easter egg is placed within the It Burns newspaper. Upon brightening the center image of the Freddy plush, Springtrap can be seen in the background, seeming to hint that he survived the fire. This is later confirmed in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator when we see... oh, never mind, that can't be him. As we've seen in both of the previous games, Scott likes to hide messages just outside of our view, like he does in the out-of-focus articles in the newspapers. Now, I'm not sure who translated these messages from the newspaper, it looks like something Mr. Magoo would have designed, but they actually contain a few facts written by Scott. These tell us that Scott only used the names Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy as placeholders at first, but he grew to like them, and that he modeled Foxy during a car ride. There's plenty more pieces of trivia to look at, I'm not going to share them all, so feel free to check them out. I'll leave a link to the wiki in the description. Also, thanks to Five Nights at Freddy's wiki for helping me to gather all of the Easter eggs used in this video. Like the previous game, FNAF 3 is full of interesting story-laden minigames. The most recognizable of these is Follow Me. I just posted a full video about this series of minigames as well as FNAF 3 as a whole, so check that out if you're interested. However, Follow Me isn't an easy minigame to place on a timeline. The story behind it is fairly easy. Shadow Freddy appears to lure the 4 original animatronics to a back room using the the phrase "follow me," and one by one William attacks and dismantles them. The common theory seems to be that he does this to take their remnant for his new funtime animatronics, in order to harvest even more remnant, and that the minigames take place after FNAF 1. Although the sprites in the minigames seem to depict the original animatronics from the 1983 Pizzeria, but then again, the map is modeled after FNAF 1. Anyways, these end of night minigames aren't really Easter eggs since they procedurally appear after every night. However, I want to group them with the other Easter eggs because they still have lore relevance. The rest of the minigames, coincidentally, are hinted at in the Follow Me minigames, with clues about how to access them hidden around the in-game map. The secret minigames are BB's Air Adventure, which requires the player to double-click a poster of Balloon Boy in the restaurant, Mangle's Quest, which is accessed by pressing arcade buttons in a specific pattern, Chica's Party, accessed by clicking 4 gray cupcakes, Stage 01, accessed by inputting a code into certain wall tiles, Glitch minigame, accessed by double-clicking a Shadow Bonnie figure, and Happiest Day, which is accessed by double-clicking a drawing of the puppet on Cam 03. I'm going to group most of these minigames together because I don't think they depict real events. Most of the minigames are connected to the game's ending, which seems to make the minigames more symbolic than literal. Further evidence is the fact that all of the minigames have to be glitched in order to get certain endings. For that reason, I don't think there's much to explain in terms of those minigames. Happiest Day is the minigame that culminates all of the hard work the player did or didn't do depending on what ending they received. Normally, the player controls a child sprite depicting the puppet and they approach a crying child. Who is this crying child? Is it Charlie Emily from Take Cake to the Children? Is it William's youngest son from Tomorrow's Another Day? Well, most likely it's not Charlie, since she's controlled by the player who places the puppet. It is most likely the crying child from FNAF 4, since he dons a Golden Freddy mask in the good ending and is believed to possess Golden Freddy. Similarly, FNAF 4's minigames are all about his birthday party, which he dies during. This Happiest Day could be symbolic of him finally getting the birthday party he never got. Since it is believed that the death of this individual is what caused William to go on his murder spree, perhaps the spirits, primarily the puppet, are attempting to remedy the cause at its source. Allow me to level with Scott and his science fiction fixation by thinking of this as a do-over, as if the spirits had a second chance. We don't necessarily know when Happiest Day takes place, but what if it is set right after all of the MCI victims and Charlie become spirits? Otherwise, we'd have to ask, why is this kid's birthday so important? What about the 5 other victims? It's because his death is what started everything. If he never died, chances are no one else would have died. Of course, giving him his cake in the afterlife doesn't necessarily stop William from committing his crimes, but I think the symbolism is that by giving this child his birthday, the wound was healed, preventing it from bleeding out to cause the series of calamity we are familiar with. Similarly, the other animatronics do get some sort of closure as well. In order to access this ending where the crying child gets his cake, 5 other crying children must be given cake, which stops them from crying. I think this minigame is symbolic of the puppet reversing what happened sometime in the 80s when William became a monster. Should Scott be praised for all of the Easter eggs he snuck into each game with a bit of lore for those trying to understand the story of Five Nights at Freddy's? Yes, but should we assume that every Easter egg has lore relevance? No. When I was coming up for the idea for this video, it was initially going to be satirical since a lot of these Easter eggs can't really be explained with any in-universe evidence. And while I did manage to reasonably come up with an explanation for about all of them, I think we as fans need to understand that not everything Scott does is precisely planned out the way we think it is. I still give Scott a lot of credit for all of the intricate and intriguing story he created in 2014 and has been building upon for the past 9 years. But we also have to understand that he is human. There are going to be contradictions and details that we consider evidence where there isn't any. Part of that is what makes the story so interesting. So take what I've said into consideration and make your own opinions. No one in the theory niche is necessarily wrong or more right than others, so let's take the evidence that we are given and work with it in the best way we can. Thanks for watching.